All right, so if we look closer at this plan, we can see there's a lot of details that we got from van maps already, but there's also a lot that's missing. For example, we don't have any of the paths or the green spaces outlined. We have very basic information about the roads, but not very much. So the idea about going into more detail is that we can really bring these site plans to life. So I'm going to just delete these previous lines that I had that I did during the demo in class. And I'm going to begin to use the offset command using my road center lines as the basis for that. And as I use offset, I'm going to use this through point up in the Rhino menu here. That's just going to allow me to select any point on the screen that I want the line to go through. And I'm just going to select things like the edge of the curbs, the edges of the sidewalks, and things like that. So I'm just going to use all of the center lines that I have and use offset and go through this site plan, particularly in the areas that are closest to the focus area. And I'm going to just start kind of creating these guidelines that I can then use to create the curbs and the sidewalks. All right, now that we have most of these curb guidelines, I would like you to right click on the layer that you've been drawing on and select the objects. And then what we're going to do is turn these into trim objects by using the TR command. And we're going to kind of get rid of the areas where they intersect in the middle of these intersections here. And that's because when we are going to use our next command, which is going to be fillet, we need to make sure that we have corners that can be independently altered. So if we have all of the connected lines, there's going to be times when the command we want to do is not going to work properly. So it's important to take this step and just go through all of these little intersections and get rid of these lines so that we kind of have what look like boxes around the edges of the blocks. So I'm just going to keep going and doing that as much as I can. And I noticed down here that if I offset the line from the center line, it doesn't really work for some parts of the curb just because of the way the curb is constructed. So what I'm going to do here is just draw my own curb line, and I'm just going to use the Polyline command, so PL for Polyline, and I'll start it here and just focusing kind of as much as I can on keeping a straight edge according to the curb. I'm just going to draw in this curb line. Okay, so now I can use this as an offset to get the sidewalks that I need in this area. And I'm going to need to use an interpolate curve to draw this line up here because it is more curved, and I'm just going to finish it off at the end there. And I'll use that to offset and get the sidewalk lines as well. So when I am ready to start filleting these curves to create the curb corners, you will just type in F for fillet, and you can select a radius. So you can just type in R for radius or just hit radius on the Rhino menu. And then you can begin experimenting with some of the values. Usually in cities, curb cuts are between 6 or 8 meters in radius, and that is to allow for turning radiuses for cars. And then in alleyways and smaller spaces, they're usually around 4 meters. You might have to just do a little bit of experimentation as you go and you fillet the areas that are relevant to your block. This one has a lot of different radiuses. Some of them even go up to 12, particularly in alleyways when there's a bigger curve around a block. But yeah, I'm just going to go through and create all of the curb edges that I can. And then I'm going to join those curve edges and use them as trim objects to get rid of these like extra sidewalk lines. So I can easily select all of the center lines by right-clicking and going select objects. And now I'm just going to use J for join, and that's going to create as many joined polylines as I can. And now I don't have to select multiple objects. I can just select one object here and use it as a trim command for these sidewalk edges as they kind of overlap and cross that filleted edge. And then I can go in and select all of these sidewalk lines and use TR for trim and then get rid of the extra lines that are kind of in the middle where they cross over. So we just want the sidewalks to read as like one continuous thing. We don't want to have all of these lines. So I'm just going to keep going throughout my plan and making those edits as well. There may be parts where you have missed doing some offsetting, so you may have to just keep going and going through this process of offsetting and trimming lines and filleting them and getting in those sidewalks and edges. So just be sure that you're focusing closely to your site and don't get too carried away like I did, going way outside the boundaries of what you really need. Just keep in mind that there is a limit to the size of the site plan, and we don't need to have like a super, super huge area to work with. So you can keep using the same commands that we've been practicing. Those are fillet, offset, split, trim, extend, line, polyline. And if you're ever curious about what command I'm using, you can always just look at the command line as I'm working. It will say what I'm doing and what's going on. In this little area here, we have a bit of an anomaly in the corner. It's not just the two sidewalks intersecting. There's like a bit of an extra concrete area. So I'm going to use extend to extend these lines to this one. And then I'm going to actually draw in a polyline edge that I can use around here as a trim object. So I'm just going to use a polyline PL for polyline and draw it in like that, and then select it and use it as a trim object. And then I can select the reverse, the sidewalk lines here, and use those as trim objects and get rid of the lines intersecting that I don't need. So we can see this is a lot more accurate than the city blocks that we had before. Now we have a little bit more fine-grained detail. I'm going to use a line to close off these polylines up here. So now we have like kind of a dead-end road. And over here we have a bulb, a turning bulb. So I'm going to use a circle to help me close this off. I'm just going to guess where the center is. I can always move it around later. And I'm going to try to get it as close to the map as possible. I'll use my gumball to just move it around into place. And now I'm going to use the road lines to actually split this circle into pieces. So I've selected the circle and put in SP for split, and then use the road lines as cutting objects. And now I have pieces of a circle that I can fillet and get rid of the extra that I don't need. And now I have a turning bulb here. And if I actually select the rest of the pieces of the circle and join them together using J for join, I can offset those and offset them to the sidewalk edge here. And then I can also fillet those sidewalk edges with the existing and get rid of all the extras just by using trim and split. There's a little hack here. You can just select a line, and once you've selected a line, it shows the control points. And if you just drag on the control point, you can actually snap it to another place. So you don't always have to trim something. You can sometimes just use the control point and move it around that way. I'm going to get rid of these extra little bits of the sidewalks that I don't need. These intersections don't actually exist in real life, so I'm just going to get rid of them. And I'm going to keep working with my line work until I'm satisfied that I have done all of the roads and all of the sidewalks that I need. All right, up over here, we have an edge that needs to be finished off. So I'm just going to draw a line here. And again, as I said, you kind of have to evaluate the site plan. What I'm noticing is that this curb cut that I've made here is actually not a real curb cut. It's not a real alley. So what I can do is just explode the line using X for explode, get rid of the bit that I don't need. And now I can just drag this polyline control point to the end, and I can just control it that way. So just watch out. Sometimes it's a bit difficult. There might be double lines on the end. So I'm just going to make sure I select that one, and I can select the other control point and just hit delete, and it will get rid of it. So I don't need this, that center line, but what I do need is this parking lot. So I'm going to begin drafting that in, just trying to evaluate where I can draw polylines and where I might want to fillet them to create edges. I'm not going to worry about drawing in the center bits with all the little planted areas, but when I come to an area where I would need to draw a different type of curve, I'm just going to end my polyline command and I'll leave it blank, and I'll draw it in with a interpolate points curve afterwards. So I'll go back here and use my interpolate points curve and just draw in this section here. And that's it. And now I can begin to intersect lines where I need to and create the curb cuts as I need to. And whenever I feel like I am ready to join my curves, I can just right click on the center lines layer and use J for, select all the objects and then use J for join. And I can keep going through and just trimming anything that I don't need. So I have all these lines up here. I'm going to use my outline as a trim object and just make a selection box around everything I want to get rid of. And now if I turn off my Google image, I can take a look at my line work and just make a note of where I need to just keep getting rid of some things and cleaning some of the lines up. Some of them I just might not need anymore, so I can just delete the lines. If there's ever objects that aren't able to be trimmed, you can always just explode them and then use your trims that way. I think this is looking pretty good, and I think I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is drafting in the planting and the trees.